Egypt condemns illegal Israeli steps to annex the occupied West Bank. Jordan's king urges international action to curb the escalation in the West Bank. And Iran's president says Tehran is not seeking nuclear weapons. Hello there, good morning. Live from Cairo, this is Qnews. Egypt's foreign minister has condemned what he called illegal Israeli steps to annex the occupied West Bank, warning they violate international law. Speaking during a UN Security Council session on Middle East developments, Foreign Minister Badr Abdel-Ati said the measures in the West Bank are unlawful and run counter to international charters and UN resolutions. He stressed the need to preserve Palestinian territorial unity, rejecting any separation or fragmentation of Palestinian lands. Abdel-Ati also reaffirmed Egypt's support for Palestinian rights, including self-determination and the establishment of an independent state. Palestine's UN envoy is warning that settlements and settler violence are aimed at annexing the occupied West Bank. Addressing the UN Security Council, Riyad Mansour said expanding settlements and what he described as settler attacks are part of a broader push to absorb West Bank territory. He stressed that self-determination and an independent state are fundamental Palestinian rights. Mansour called for international action to stop Israeli measures against Palestinians, urging what he described. Jordan's King Abdullah is urging international action to curb the escalation in the West Bank and stop Israeli settlement expansion. Meeting German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier in Amman, the king warned that continued violations at holy sites in Jerusalem risk inflaming tensions further. He also welcomed Germany's support for sustaining the Gaza ceasefire and stressed the need to implement an agreement to end the war, ensure aid delivery, and back efforts to rebuild Syria while safeguarding its security and stability. Palestinians in Qnews are marking the first day of Ramadan under severe hardship, with many relying on charity meals to get through the day. Long lines formed as families gathered to receive hot meals distributed by local charities, highlighting the deepening humanitarian strain. Residents say the focus has shifted from celebration to survival, while organizations like World Central Kitchen and the Egyptian Red Crescent have scaled up operations, providing over 1.6 million meals daily. The UN warns that aid remains critically insufficient. With market prices for basic lanterns and sweets doubling since last year, most of Gaza's 2.3 million residents are marking the month in total darkness as a lack of fuel and electricity continues to paralyze the strip's infrastructure. The UN is sounding the alarm over the fragility of the peace in Gaza. At a high-stakes meeting and ministerial meeting in New York, Under Secretary General Rosemary DiCarlo warned that while the guns have largely fallen silent, the region is at a dangerous crossroads that requires immediate collective action. Speaking before the UN Security Council, DiCarlo, the Under Secretary General for Political and Peace-Building Affairs, described the current situation in the Middle East as a pivotal moment. She emphasized that while a ceasefire has been in place since October last year, Gaza still does not know true peace, citing persistent Israeli strikes and critical shortages of life-saving aid. Now, the White House is defending President Donald Trump's Board of Peace. This comes after the Vatican said it will not join. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt says the board is a legitimate organization and called the Vatican's refusal an unfortunate decision. Speaking at a briefing, Leavitt said the administration had hoped for Vatican participation, but will move ahead regardless. The Vatican has not provided further details on its decision. And a somber start to Ramadan in Qnews as families bury a 14-year-old boy. Grieving relatives gathered today to mourn the teenager who was shot in the eastern outskirts of the city. Witnesses say the boy was near the border area when the incident occurred. The Israeli military has not yet issued a specific statement on the engagement near the Yellow Line. Now, from Palestine, we turn to events in the wider Middle East, where diplomatic and security shifts are unfolding across Syria and Lebanon, with new moves on troop deployments, sanctions, and military support efforts. The Wall Street Journal has reported that the U.S. is preparing to withdraw all remaining troops from Syria, citing 3 U.S. officials. The report says roughly 1,000 American personnel could be pulled out, with withdrawals from remaining positions expected over the next 2 months. U.S. authorities have not publicly confirmed the timeline, and details on the scope of the move remain limited. Canada is significantly easing its economic pressure on Syria, lifting broad sanctions that have been in place for over a decade. Foreign Minister Anita Anand says the move aims to support the country's recovery following the fall of the Assad regime. The policy shift removes 24 entities and 1 individual from Canada's restricted list, effectively reopening paths for investment and financial services. Global Affairs Canada confirmed that the amendments lift prohibitions on the import and export of goods, as well as petroleum-related sanctions. The move follows Canada's recent decision to remove Syria from its list of state supporters of terrorism, aligning with shifts in the United States and regional policy. Now, Lebanon's army chief has held talks with key ambassadors on preparations for an international conference to support the Lebanese armed forces, which is due in Egypt next Tuesday. Army Commander General Rudolf Heikel met ambassadors from the five-nation group focused on Lebanon to review arrangements for the Army Support Conference and a preparatory meeting scheduled in Egypt on February 24th. Participants stressed the need to strengthen the Lebanese military's capabilities, citing its central role in maintaining Lebanon's security and stability at a sensitive time for the country. Now, in eastern South Sudan, fresh fighting has sent wounded civilians to a Kobo teaching hospital where doctors are struggling to cope. Patients describe civilians as especially exposed as displacement rises and communities flee the violence. The hospital's only surgeon is dealing with mass casualties amid severe shortages of fuel, medicines and surgical equipment, raising fears more lives could be lost without urgent resupply and access to care. A humanitarian disaster is unfolding in South Sudan's Jonglei state as fresh fighting between government and opposition forces intensifies. The UN reports that over 280,000 people have been displaced, with families in informal camps warning they are on the brink of starvation. The escalation, which began in late December, has seen heavy clashes across central and northern Jonglei, forcing thousands to flee into the open with no access to food or clean water. More than half of those displaced are children, many of whom have been uprooted multiple times. Humanitarian agencies say their operations are being crippled by airstrikes, the looting of aid convoys, and the seizure of medical facilities. Now, the UN is warning Sudan's war is driving an unprecedented displacement crisis, with needs far outstripping available aid. UN spokesman Stefan Dujarric says nearly 3 years into the conflict, civilians are facing almost daily drone attacks, forcing millions to flee within Sudan and in neighboring countries. He says the UNHCR and 123 partner organizations are seeking $1.6 billion to support 5.9 million people across 7 host countries by the end of the war. Warning host communities are being pushed to the brink, and chronic underfunding is driving a 4th consecutive annual appeal. Dujarric urged all parties to respect international law and never target civilians or civilian infrastructure. The White House says Iran talks in Geneva made a little progress this week, but major gaps remain. Officials say these sides are still far apart on some issues, and Tehran is expected to return within the next couple of weeks with more detailed proposals. The White House did not specify which points remain unresolved, but what would be needed to narrow the distance between the two positions. Now, Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian says Tehran is not seeking nuclear weapons and wants the international community, especially the United States, to recognize that.
بارها اعلام کردیم. اعلام من مهم نیست. سیاست و فتوای مقام معظم رهبری از نظر اعتقادی مهمه. به هیچ وجه به دنبال سلاح هسته‌ای نیستیم. هر گونه بخوان راستی آزمایی بکنن ما آمادگی اینو داریم که این راستی آزمایی اتفاق بیفته. ولی اینکه نتونیم از علم و دانایی برای نجات بیماری‌هامون، صنعتمون، کشاورزیمون استفاده کنیم، اینو قبول نمی‌کنیم.
President Pezeshkian. Now, Russia says one of its naval ships has arrived in Iran ahead of planned joint drills in regional waters. Russia's defense ministry says the corvette Stoichi docked at Iran's port of Bandar Abbas, releasing video of the arrival and the welcoming ceremony. The ministry says Russian and Iranian naval forces coordinated to help ensure the safety of civilian shipping. Iranian media report the two sides will hold naval exercises on Thursday in the Sea of Oman and the northern Indian Ocean, days after Iran's Revolutionary Guards conducted drills linked to temporary safety measures in parts of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, the third round of trilateral peace talks in Geneva has concluded with a breakthrough just days before the 4th anniversary of the conflict. While the White House claims meaningful progress was made, President Zelensky warned that key political and territorial disputes remain far from resolved. While technical progress was reported on a ceasefire monitoring mechanism involving the U.S., the fate of the Donbass and the Zaporizhia nuclear power plant remains deadlocked. President Trump has continued to pile pressure on Kyiv to reach a deal fast, a stance Zelensky described as unfair, while Russian forces continue to strike Ukrainian energy infrastructure. Now, President Volodymyr Zelensky has expressed deep dissatisfaction with the latest rounds of peace talks in Geneva, warning that sensitive political matters remain unaddressed. This comes as Kyiv imposes a fresh wave of sanctions against Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko. In his nightly address, Zelensky signaled a major diplomatic escalation against Minsk, accusing Lukashenko of trading Belarusian sovereignty for Russian military favor. The new sanctions target over 3,000 Belarusian enterprises, allegedly supplying critical components for Russian missiles. Zelensky specifically pointed to the deployment of drone relay stations and the Oreshnik missile system on Belarusian soil as direct threats to European security. Now, President Vladimir Putin has reaffirmed Moscow's unwavering support for Cuba as the island nation faces a crippling fuel crisis. Meeting with Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez, Putin condemned what he called unacceptable new U.S. restrictions aimed at suffocating the Caribbean ally. The visit comes as Havana reels from a de facto oil blockade following President Trump's executive order targeting nations that supply fuel to the island. While the Kremlin stopped short of announcing a specific delivery schedule, Russian state media report that a humanitarian oil shipment is currently being finalized. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov separately urged Washington to abandon its threat of a naval blockade. U.S. pressure as a violation of international law. Now, tensions are boiling over in Central Europe as Hungary and Slovakia announce an immediate halt to diesel exports to Ukraine. The move comes in retaliation for the continued blockage of Russian crude oil transit through the Druzhba pipeline. Budapest and Bratislava have accused Kyiv of political blackmail, alleging that Ukraine is intentionally delaying repairs to the pipeline infrastructure damaged by Russian strikes in January. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico went further, threatening to cut off emergency electricity supplies to Ukraine if the transit remains blocked. While Ukraine maintains that Russian attacks are solely responsible for the outage, the European Commission is now intervening to prevent a broader energy crisis.
Donald John Trump can solemnly swear.
If you look at that, or we're out.
Peru has a new leader, following another dramatic shift to the nation's political landscape. Leftist lawmaker Jose Maria Balcazar has been sworn in as interim president, becoming the country's 8th head of state in just 10 years. The 83-year-old former judge received the presidential sash after a vote in Congress led by the Speaker. Balcazar's election follows the impeachment of his predecessor, Jose Geri, who was ousted on Tuesday over corruption allegations involving Chinese businessmen. In his first remarks, Balcazar called for a stronger and more effective democracy, promising to lead a steady transition until national elections held in April. And the City of London this week has marked Shrove Tuesday with its annual interlivery pancake race at Guildhall Yard. Dozens of livery companies competed in the colourful tradition, which raises vital funds for the Lord Mayor's charity and the Master Pelican Trust. The 22nd annual event saw competitors from 46 livery companies, ranging from the Powelters to the gunmakers, racing in full ceremonial regalia and fancy dress. While the races were timed with precision by the Worshipful Company of Clockmakers, the real focus was on charity, with proceeds supporting the West Ham Foundation and the Royal Foundation's Homewards Initiative. Spectators at the Guildhall enjoyed fresh pancakes provided by the Clink Charity, a group dedicated to rehabilitating former prisoners through culinary training. Following the final heats, winners were presented with commemorative frying pans and the overall trophy, continuing a tradition that marks the beginning of the 40-day Lent season.
Early lead by the Chartered Architect.
Now that brings us to the end of our bulletin for now. Let's recap the main headlines this morning. Egypt condemns illegal Israeli steps to annex the occupied West Bank. And Jordan's king urges international action to curb the escalation. And Iran's president says Tehran is not seeking nuclear weapons. Of course, you can join us online 24 hours a day. Our handle is at Qnews EGY. Just go to your favorite social media platform. But for now, from all of us here, thanks for watching.